The door to the station swung open, releasing a gust of cold air that carried with it the sound of distant, hollow echoes. Jake and Sarah stood at the threshold, their hearts pounding as they faced the void. Behind them, the bus rumbled quietly, like it was waiting for something. The old man's words echoed in Jake's mind. You don't stop it, you accept it. With every step they took, the darkness deepened and the path became less clear. The fog outside the station had thinned, but the shadows inside were denser, almost alive. Sarah reached for Jake's hand, squeezing tightly. Neither of them spoke, but the gravity of what they were about to face weighed heavily between them. At the end of the hall, they saw a faint light, a single door at the far side of the station. Its frame was cracked, and it flickered like an old light bulb about to burn out. They knew instinctively that this was their final destination, the place where their journey would finally conclude. As they approached the door, Jake felt the air around him grow colder. His breath became visible, each exhale a puff of mist in the frigid air. Sarah shivered beside him, her hand trembling in his. "Are you ready for this?" Jake whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was asking her or himself. Sarah's eyes, wide and full of fear, locked onto his. "I don't know, but we don't have a choice anymore, do we?" With a deep breath, Jake reached for the door. The moment his hand touched the cold handle, the whispers returned, louder, more urgent. They weren't the distant murmurs of the bus passengers this time. They were closer, sharper, like voices pressing in on his mind, demanding to be heard. "Don't go through that door," one voice said, a woman's voice pleading. "It's not what you think." "Turn back," another voice hissed, a man's voice filled with fear. "You don't know what's waiting for you." But Jake had come too far. He twisted the handle and pushed the door open. Beyond the door was a room unlike anything Jake and Sarah had ever seen. It was vast, yet empty, with walls that seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions. In the center of the room, sitting on a simple wooden chair, was the old man, the same man they had met at the station. But now he seemed even older, frailer, as though the weight of centuries pressed down on him. "You're here," the old man said, his voice low and gravelly. "You made it to the end." Jake stepped forward cautiously, pulling Sarah with him. "What is this place?" he asked. "Why are we here?" The old man smiled weakly, his eyes glinting with a sorrowful wisdom. "This is the end of the line, the final stop. For everyone who has ever ridden the bus, this is where their journey ends." Sarah's voice trembled. "But what happens to us now? What is this truth you keep talking about?" The old man's gaze softened as he looked at them both. "The truth is, the bus doesn't just take you from place to place. It carries more than passengers. It carries the weight of your decisions, your fears, your regrets. Every person who steps onto that bus is running from something." Jake felt a chill creep up his spine. "Running from what?" "From themselves," the old man replied quietly. "Every rider is haunted by the choices they've made. That's why the bus finds you. It's a place where you confront the things you've tried to bury." Sarah's eyes widened with realization. The passengers, they're trapped because they can't face what they've done. The old man nodded slowly. "Yes, and some of them never can. That's why they stay on the bus, forever riding, never reaching the end." Jake felt a deep unease settle in his chest. "So, what do we do? How do we get off the bus for good?" The old man's gaze turned steely, his frail hand pointing toward the center of the room. "To truly leave, you must face what brought you to the bus in the first place. You have to confront your darkest fear. your deepest regret. Jake's heart sank. He thought back to his life, to everything that had led him here. What was he running from? What had he buried so deeply that it had summoned the cursed bus into his life? Sarah stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. I think I know what mine is. The old man's eyes narrowed as he focused on her. Then you must face it, child. Only then can you be free. Sarah's breath hitched as she closed her eyes, the memories flooding back. It was 3 years ago. She began, her voice shaking. I was driving late at night, coming back from a party. I wasn't paying attention. I was tired, distracted, and I hit someone, a man. He came out of nowhere, and I didn't stop. I just drove away. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke, the weight of her guilt crashing over her like a tidal wave. I didn't know if he survived. I didn't check. I just ran. Jake watched her, his heart aching for her, but he remained silent. I've carried that guilt with me ever since, Sarah continued. Every night I hear his voice, I see his face. I know I can't undo what I did, but I can't live with the shame. The old man nodded solemnly. That's why the bus found you, Sarah. It knew you were running from that night. But you can't escape it. Not until you face it. Sarah sobbed quietly, the weight of her confession lifting, but the pain remained. What do I do now? The old man's expression softened. You forgive yourself. You accept that you made a terrible mistake, but you don't let it define the rest of your life. Only then can you move forward. Sarah took a deep, shuddering breath. She closed her eyes and whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And then, in the silence that followed, the room seemed to shift. The air lightened, the darkness receded, and Sarah's tears slowed. She opened her eyes, and for the first time, Jake saw a glimmer of peace in them. The old man turned to Jake. And you, Jake, what are you running from? Jake's mind raced, sifting through his memories. His thoughts flashed to his family, his career, the people he had hurt along the way. But there was one memory, one decision that stood out above the rest. My brother, Jake said, his voice low. We were supposed to meet up a few years ago. He was struggling with some stuff, but I was too busy, too focused on my own life. He needed me, and I wasn't there for him. A week later, he overdosed. The words felt heavy in his throat, like they had been lodged there for years. I've never forgiven myself for not being there when he needed me. I let him down. The old man's gaze was piercing. And you've been running from that guilt ever since. Jake nodded, tears stinging his eyes. Yeah, I couldn't face it. I couldn't admit that I had failed him. The old man stood slowly, walking toward Jake. It's not about failure, Jake. It's about accepting that you couldn't control what happened. You need to forgive yourself, just as Sarah has. Jake swallowed hard, his chest tight with emotion. He closed his eyes, remembering his brother's face, the last conversation they had, the regrets he had carried with him every day since. And in that moment, he whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The room grew brighter, the darkness lifting completely. The whispers faded, replaced by an almost serene silence. Jake felt the weight of his guilt slowly dissolve, leaving behind a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The old man smiled gently, his body fading into the light. You've both done what so many others could not. You've faced your past. You've forgiven yourselves. And now, you're free. Jake and Sarah stood side by side, watching as the old man disappeared into the light, the station dissolving around them. The bus was gone. The fog was gone. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they were truly free. They looked at each other, the weight of their journey behind them. They had faced the darkest parts of themselves, and they had survived. As they walked away from the station, hand in hand, they knew they would never forget the bus or the choices they had made. But they also knew that their journey had come to an end, and they were finally at peace. This story is the end. New story few days later.